All right. Hello, everyone. Ren's here today, too. Welcome to our podcast, which is Courageous Conversations in EdTech. My name is Victoria Thompson. You can find me on Twitter at Victoria the Tech. I am an educator. I'm a STEM coach, actually. I'm an author. I'm a consultant, and I'm a blogger. And I'm super excited to welcome y'all here today. And this is actually the third installment of Courageous Conversations in EdTech. The first that we did, me, Dr. Eileen Winokur, and Melody McAllister, we all were just kind of introducing ourselves and why this project is so important to us. The second that we had, which was last week, we talked about intentionality with EdTech. Why are we using it? What's the purpose? And also, how can we make the experience better for our students? And then today, we're really excited to talk to y'all about just vetting resources online and the importance of making sure that our intent is positive, but also, of course, what happens afterward is positive as well. So, of course, want to welcome our communities. We have Teacher Tech, we have EduMatch, we have Twitter, and anyone else that's watching us from any other different site. We seriously welcome you, and I cannot thank y'all enough for being part of this passion project with us. You know, it kind of was a grassroots organization startup where Melody and I were talking. You know, I contacted Eileen. I knew that, she'd be great for this. And this really is a passion project. You know, we're doing this because we want folks to have the information, and we want to make sure that moving forward with EdTech, we have the courage to have these conversations with folks, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Eileen.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Eileen Winokur. I'm coming in to talk to you from Kuwait, where it's a little past 3 a.m., but this is such an important topic. I go to sleep, I wake up and go back to sleep. I have been in education for over 25 years here in Kuwait, and also am going to talk a little bit about the 4 agreements that we use during this conversation, which are really, really important. The 4 agreements are from the book that Melody is showing you right now by Glenn Singleton. And they really are the basis for all courageous conversations that we should be having right now, especially in the climate that we're living in, wherever you are in the world. I was actually talking to my family today about the fact that we need to really listen, and we need to be willing to listen also. So what are the 4 agreements that we stand by? Stay engaged, even if we're on both sides of the aisle, or we don't agree, or we're not really sure what the other person is talking about. We want to stay engaged. We want to be part of that conversation. If we experience discomfort, that's a good thing. We should experience discomfort because it means that we're listening and that we're trying to understand. We need to be able to feel safe, in a safe place, to be able to speak our truth. And we should all be speaking our truth, respectfully, of course, but we should be saying what we feel, and our feelings really matter. And we should expect and accept non-closure, meaning that we probably or may possibly walk away from the conversation not having resolved anything, but hopefully understanding the other side or the other point of view a lot better. And so we need to push ourselves. That's why they're courageous conversations.
Hi, guys. Oh, my goodness. I think that might be Dr. Sarah. I'm not for sure, but she is always popping in. Dr. Sarah Thomas, thank you. And for anybody who's joining us, my name is Melody McAllister, and it is such an honor always to talk with Dr. Eileen and Victoria, and just we really think a lot about this. We had a vision for this, but it's actually changed a little over the last month because of just finding Flipgrid and just finding a way that we can show what we're doing and help others to put it in an applicable way into the classroom or share with other colleagues. And so this has been kind of a fun ride and just a learning experience. And yes, it is Dr. Sarah Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us and your support. And one of the things that I love about this, so when we talked about some of the topics that that we wanted to feature, vetting resources was definitely near and dear Victoria's heart. And because as a lot of us know, when we're not really in on what is happening with students of color and their family, and we're not engaged in that, and we don't even have it in our vision to even care, we often will say things or use resources that can have effects on them that we're not even aware that we're doing, but those effects have long-term, it can even be traumatic for students long-term. And I just want to start this off by sharing something that I know when I look back and reflect on my own teaching practices that I have learned from. And then I'm going to let Victoria, because she's very passionate about this, talk also. Well, everybody is invited to talk with us. If you are watching us live and you want to drop a comment, please do. And if you have a question, we do have kind of a plan, but we are going to go with the conversation and the needs that you are showing us. And but I do want to talk about, so one thing that I really reflect on, this is not easy for me to talk about because I have really changed over the last few years to being somebody who had no idea that I was not even clued into any perspective besides my own, to being very aware that my perspective is very different from others. For instance, when I moved from the Midwest to Texas, we learned about the Civil War very differently from Missouri and Texas. But I adopted the way that Texas and their textbooks, featured it. And it was very much about how it was about states' rights. It was not about slavery. But growing up, I learned that it was very much to do about slavery. But I adopted the version that Texas put in their textbooks because I felt like it was easier and it was more palatable. And knowing that now, I realize that I was wrong to not look up more, and our history is not palatable at all. And I wasn't giving the true history. So, I'm not going to go into too much more detail but I'm just saying that I know that I was wrong, and that's what I hope to do today, is to help others who are like me, just on this journey to get it right, to learn how to get it right, and to not just look at a resource, even a textbook, and just assume that the information inside of it is correct, that it's still very biased. So I hope that is okay. Was that clear? I got a little confused because it's hard to talk about.
Totally clear. And actually because I was a teacher, y'all know, in South Carolina for about 4 years before I moved over to Seattle. It was the same thing. And I grew up in New Jersey, right? So in New Jersey, and northeastern states, Eileen, you probably know, like, it's very direct. Like, the Civil War happened because of this, this, and this, and not even a mention of states' rights. But when I moved to South Carolina, and something interesting about South Carolina is that those students have 3 years of state history. So not 1, but 3. They get it in 3rd grade, they get it in 8th grade, and then they get it again when they're, I think, juniors or maybe sophomores in high school. But the entire state history revolves around, like, South Carolina's role in agriculture, South Carolina's role in the Civil War. And it's very heavily either hinted, depending on the book, right, or the resource, or explicitly stated that it's states' rights, right? So for me as a Black woman, and I'm thinking of Black students I taught, just how ridiculous, that might sound, where, as a Black woman, my humanity is a part of states' rights. Like, as a Black student, my humanity was a states' rights. Like, we called this the Civil War. Nothing was civil about it, and it's, that's kind of how we started to have this conversation about the positive intent, negative consequences, because I remember when I was a first-year teacher, any free resource I could get was gold. And I hoarded them all, right, in like a folder on my computer. Sometimes I even had paper copies if I couldn't scan them. Any resource I got was absolute gold. But I kind of think back and reflect on my experiences. And I'm a STEM educator, so it's a bit different. STEM and math, right? But I mean, you see crazy things like there was something in Georgia that happened not too long ago where the word problem for 2nd graders, I think, involved slaves. And, there's nothing positive about that intent. Let's just be clear. But why did it have to be that way in the word problem? You couldn't have come up with something better. So when I think about vetting resources through this lens and making sure that we are acknowledging all of our students and their experiences, there are a couple different things that I specifically do in my role as a coach, because I've got some folks that might come to me to, collaborate on a resource, or maybe I'm looking at a lesson and it could be improved, or, I have recommendations. So the first would be just taking time to do research on the author and also on the text. Teachers pay teachers. I don't know how y'all feel about that. I've got some mixed feelings. I found some awesome stuff on TPT, but I've also found some, rinky-dink crossword puzzle stuff on TPT. So just really vetting that resource and looking at it with intent, like take time to actually do the research. If you find it in 30 seconds and you can print it out, that's awesome. But then your kids are kind of stuck with a crossword puzzle, or maybe they're stuck with right from the perspective of a slave, and that's not okay. That's really not all right. So definitely make sure that you do the research. And then, of course, if there's diverse speakers or authors in your area, go for it. And if none of them actually reside in your area or in your immediate vicinity, they could speak out to platforms like Skype in the Classroom. I've had a lot of success with Skype in the Classroom. Working just with other folks in the area that are volunteers. I've had a lot of experience with that. So just getting students to be involved takes research on the teacher's end, and it's going to be more than 30 seconds, but it's going to be worth it. Also, something you can do is communicate your goals for diversity in the classroom to not only families, but also the kids. Because kids have great ideas. They have wonderful, wonderful ideas. And if they don't like something, or if they want to see more of something, then that can be an impetus for you to be like, okay, maybe I should check out, what Johnny was saying, or maybe I should check out what Ren was saying, who's sitting on my lap right now. But, if you communicate those goals to parents, when you breach these conversations, you might receive questions or inquiries. And I found that when I do this with my students and my teachers as well, it becomes like, oh, I'll volunteer, or, oh, I'll speak, right? Or, oh, I have a resource. It becomes collaborative instead of pitting folks against each other, which I really enjoy. And then something else really cool too is, if you want to start a paper or email newsletter to just kind of communicate these things to students and parents, I've done the flip side where my kids do it. So my students are the ones creating the newsletter about cool things they've seen, right? Resources that they're aware of. And then I can also create lessons and modify and adjust based off of that. But all of these have not only the positive intent, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to have that positive reaction as well. Because parents and families and kids, they see that you're invested. They see that you're involved. They see that you care about them. And they also see that you're not just pulling something random off of the internet, right? Like you're actually making strides to acknowledge them and their diversity and their culture.
Definitely. And I want to read a couple of awesome comments. And so Dr. Desiree says, slaves in a math problem makes no sense. And I think that we need to be looking for things like that. We need to be more sensitive about what is being mentioned when we use any resource. And then Dr. Sarah Thomas says, shout out to Valerie Lewis. She remembers a few years back, they were trying to get students to research and write their own history books. And I think that is amazing. And then Dr. Desiree also says that building that culture, like you were talking about, Victoria, in your room where students feel comfortable speaking up about diversity, they will tell you what they don't like and what they like, but only if you feel safe doing it. They feel safe doing it. And I think that is absolutely so incredible. They have to feel safe. And I'm not sure a few years ago that my students felt very safe to speak up or even knew that they could speak up, that they even had a voice to speak up. And then we have another comment. Appreciate this reminder that positive intent isn't enough. We need positive actions and outcomes too. Thank you so much, Tony. And
oh, Tony's here.
Yeah. I think this is Valerie saying this. So yes, thank you. We have more comments coming in. Yes, now it feels like the world is caught up. Okay, and that's a great thing to say this because we are more intentional now. And I don't want, and I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk.
No, I think it's really important, Melody.
I'm trying to stay up with it, and I'm shutting you guys down. I'm so sorry.
No, I think the comments are really important because we need to see where our watchers and listeners, what they're interested in and what kinds of things resonate with them. That guides, somewhat what we're talking about. I think part of the thing that I'm hearing and seeing now is the lack of perspective taking. And I'm not sure where that comes from and why that's happened. I was educated many, many years before both of you and perhaps many of our listeners and watchers. And of course, as Victoria mentioned, I grew up in the Northeast. So I grew up in Buffalo, New York. And, the history is his story. So wherever you are in the world, that's basically the lens that you get. But I remember when we were in school, we had the opportunity to look at different points of view and to put ourselves in the place of someone else. And I'm not sure how much time we take offering that to our students. And so I love the idea of Valerie Lewis for let's write our own history. Let's really research into what happened, and let's not just take for granted that whatever's in our textbook, whoever's history it is the history, because there are always so many different points of view. And so I think that the whole idea of perspective taking when we're vetting textbooks, when we're vetting technology, is really, really important. I have perspective of white privilege. I have perspective of growing up Jewish. I have perspective now of becoming Muslim, and living in Kuwait, speaking a different language, being bilingual. All of those things affect how I look at things, but that's not comprehensive. I don't know what someone who actually grew up in Kuwait or grew up in another place really believes. And so we really need to look at those perspectives. And perhaps that's lacking now in some of the things that we're doing in school. And as Victoria was saying, I think it's really, really important that we give students a chance to have that voice and choice to be able to do their own research and find out what's going on, instead of the textbook or the resource being the one telling them this is the way it happened.
Right. Eileen, I want to go back to your point when you were talking about just like, what do we understand and what might we not understand in the classroom? So Melody, I think you might have posted it in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of my favorite resources is called Misbehavior or Misinterpretation. And it's not necessarily academic, right? It's all about behavior in class and whatnot. But anyway, I really like it because it highlights that just kind of interactions between teachers and students need to improve, especially considering that 80% of the teachers that are in the United States are white women. And in public schools, the vast majority are children of color. And not to discount the work that white women do in the classroom, but sometimes because of that cultural shift, or maybe just kind of that barrier that maybe, if you're coming from a place of privilege, or maybe if you're not understanding where your students are coming from, then maybe you are not interpreting something, or maybe you're just not seeing something from a different way. So it specifically points out that because middle class and European American is kind of how they deem it, professionals hold most teaching positions, classroom policies and expectations tend to reflect that culturally specific perspective. So that kind of goes back to what you were saying, where, we've got certain things that we walk into with the classroom, whether it's bias, whether it's culture, whether it's, ideas, whether it's whatever. But we also have to realize that not all of our students are coming from that perspective. And I even see that now when I'm talking to like my friends, I might mention something and they're like, that's crazy. I can't believe that happened to you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a Black woman, but sometimes they might be white, maybe they're Hispanic, like it really doesn't matter. But we see things from our specific point of view, and it's our job not to divide, but to come together. So in that specific example they give with the students, they're kind of expected to learn and conform to the standards that the teacher sets, as opposed to the teacher taking time to learn about the student. And that's sometimes where that clash happens, right? Where we've got this resource, we haven't taken the time to understand our students, know their culture, know where they're coming from, and then suddenly you get a call from a parent because you did something their child wasn't happy for. So it's intent, it's outcome, but also it's just, humanity, right? And it's also decency. Let's find out where our kids are coming from, and then we can take it from there. And
I'm going to read some of the amazing comments that are coming in. And I just want to thank everybody who's viewing and watching, listening and sharing. But, and if a student says, I'm uncomfortable with this, that is one place where we can stop and we can actually acknowledge what they're sharing with us. And that's a way that we can also correct what we've done. Because if we learn that something is uncomfortable, there's a lesson right there, and we can pull it from whatever we're doing, because we know right then and there that it is not respecting that student, and it's probably not respecting other students. And it doesn't have to be something that we do anymore. We can make it right for when we are wrong. And here are some of the comments. Dr. Sarah says, my school experiences were just the textbook, but my parents gave me the real. Dr. Desiree says, intent is important though, but it is definitely not enough. Learning more to be and do better is everything. Asking others who are different from you if something is okay is important, and listen when someone tells you it is not. Yes, thank you for that. Tony says, intentional perspective taking can impact empathy, appreciation, understanding, and respect. Totally. Students need to know how to vet information, but have access to multiple resources with a myriad of perspectives.
That's a problem. Yeah.
And now in our world, we have so many different perspectives offered and so many different resources. So this is more applicable than it ever was before. Yes, and Dr. Desiree also says, letting your students question and be comfortable being uncomfortable with what is taught as the norm. Challenging the status quo creates thinkers and people who can discuss and debate. Oh my gosh, and do we need that ever? And teacher training on cultural responsiveness is key before rolling it out. Definitely, definitely. And so I'll let you ladies take it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we really need to look at professional development. I think that is really, really important. We need to, we know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. And so we shouldn't expect teachers or anybody to have or students to have the perspective or multiple perspectives and be culturally responsive if they're not exposed to the problems that it presents. So, I mean, if I've grown up in an atmosphere where I'm not sort of exposed and given the different perspectives, I know what I know. But that doesn't mean that I can't know more or I can't know different. And so I think it's really important that we take a look at supporting teachers to have a wider perspective. I think it's happening somewhat because of the global collaborations and the connectedness that many teachers are seeking out. But there are still classrooms around the world that really don't have the advantage of being able to look at things from different perspectives. And I think it's really important also that when we give students a chance, we remember that this is a life skill. These are life skills. If we talk about them becoming digitally savvy, digital citizens, being able to look at resources on their own and know what's a good resource, what's a reliable resource, and what isn't. If we don't teach them that perspective taking, they're not going to question what they're reading or looking at. And so while we're having these courageous conversations, I think it's important for us to remember that the beginning isn't going to be easy because many people haven't had that experience with perspective taking. And so we do need to create that safe space. We need to make everybody feel like they belong. And then when they have that courage, because they do feel safe and that they belong, they're able to voice their opinions in a way that everybody can benefit from. And that includes the student to the teacher and the teacher to the student. We need to be having these courageous conversations within the whole school atmosphere, including parents, including administrators. We all need to be able to feel that we can have these honest, straightforward conversations and be able to voice our opinions. When we feel like we have to sort of shut down because we're afraid of upsetting others, or we're afraid that we're going to lose their friendship, or that we're going to lose the respect or whatever, that's when we begin to have a problem.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And thinking too. Oh, sorry, Eileen, go ahead.
No, I was just going to read some of the comments that Melody is pulling up.
Yeah,
go ahead. Tony is saying adults need help with vetting information too. Absolutely. Yes, we all do. And Dr. Desiree says PD has to include cultural bias in many areas. It can be a training by itself, but it needs to be included in our everyday PD too. You know, the research shows, this is something I did for my doctorate. The research shows the only way to go with PD is ongoing. If teachers don't have continual PD, meaning that they're not exposed to things on a regular basis and it's not embedded in the culture of what we do every day, you're right, Dr. Desiree. It's very difficult, a 1 hour, one-off thing to sort of have it grow within us.
Right. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And one of the things I feel like we continuously talk about here on this podcast is that this is not a one-off. You know, when we're learning about having these types of conversations with colleagues, with students, right? Just with people in our lives too, we continuously learn, and this is a learning process. And that's okay. You know, that is more than okay for you to always be learning on the go. It's going to be bumpy. It's never going to be pretty all the time. But, you know, we do have these moments where we know that the work needs to be done, but let's just make sure that it's done in a way where we all benefit from it. And that's where these courageous conversations are so helpful.
Yes, and I love it. Dr. Desiree, she says her doctorate was on PD, and she is great at PD. And thank you, Jennifer, for also joining us. Yes, PD. And then the thing about it, and I put up these agreements again, because this is exactly like, if we could adhere to these agreements, then we can actually learn through that uncomfortable learning. I mean, it's really uncomfortable to learn a different perspective, like we were saying. And it's really uncomfortable when you finally realize that you've been doing some things that are not right, and that you may have to do something differently, and just and knowing that you have perpetuated something that was very wrong. I've had to do all of that. It is not pleasant or fun. It's a lot of reflection, but I promise you that I'll never go back, because when you lean into the hard work of understanding that your practices are not right, they are not beneficial for the students, you are willing to move forward. And I don't find it very hard to apologize to people that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect, but I feel like it goes both ways. You know, when you have done something to your students that is not right, I feel very like just being honest with them. Let's learn from this. I was wrong. And sometimes we don't get that. Sometimes the class has already moved on to the next grade, and you've learned over the summer and you want to do better. So you don't always get to apologize, but you get to do something different. And but if a student tells you, hey, this is not right, like Dr. Sarah Thomas has amazing parents. I know that for a fact. And what she was learning at home, if she was able to speak up to her teachers, I don't know if she was or not, but if she was able to say to her teachers, hey, what you're saying goes against what my own parents are saying, and you as a teacher can actually have the opportunity to get deeper into that, and to learn from that and apologize if necessary, just to make it right. So that's my tidbit. And we have I used Tribe. This is something, yes, that I'm seeing so much lately. Dr. Desiree says, yep, I used Tribe earlier this year and was I had never thought about it, but I learned and listened. We can all continue to do better. Totally agree. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I also think it's the way in which we use things and how we talk about them. And yeah, you know, being a teacher has been a journey. When we think back, and I remember there were, I was at a keynote by Dr. Robert Marzano, and I remember he's been in the business for, of education for 50 years and so well known. He was talking about, if I think back to my first year of teaching, it's like, it's, and those first years, we're doing it, and we're doing the best we know how. But I think it's the ongoing PD and just exposing ourselves. And, the ongoing PD doesn't necessarily have to be something where you're sitting down and somebody's presenting to you or you're going to a workshop. I remember when I started teaching, I didn't have the teaching credentials, and it was a new school here in Kuwait. And so I was allowed to teach for the first couple of years just without that teaching credential. But I knew that I didn't know so much. And so being in Kuwait, it was difficult to find any kind of PD at the time, the late 1990s. I read that. I became a member of ASCD. I read and read and read and read, vetted resources that I felt was really good. In fact, one of the reasons why I went and did my doctorate so late in life was because I was reading research for fun. And I thought, well, I should make this work for me. But, and getting those different perspectives. It's interesting that Dr. Desiree mentioned the word tribe, because I know it's a big thing here in Kuwait. There are several different types of PD and coaching and things like that, and they use the word tribe. I also think it's the way we use it, and that we don't confiscate isn't the word, but sort of appropriate from cultures. I've seen more and more now, especially from Canada and some areas of the Southwest, that when anybody starts speaking, they acknowledge the land that they're speaking from. I think that's a wonderful thing. I would have never have thought about something like that, but I think it's the way we acknowledge why we're using something. The word tribe, and I won't get into a big deal about it, but the word tribe really has significance for Native Americans and those natives who are, their traditions are so special because they are a team and so perhaps by studying that first and then using the word tribe rather than just, sort of appropriating it and using it for ourselves. So again, perspective taking. Who are we taking it from? Why are we taking it? And how are we using it? And I wonder if we just sort of drop it, whether that's a good thing either. Just some thoughts on my part. I'm not anything right or wrong. I'm just wondering what's the right way to go with it.
Mm-hmm. Right. I love the land acknowledgement. So actually for every meeting that my workplace has, and then before every PD, like large scale PD that we do a land acknowledgement, just kind of acknowledging, what land we're on. I'd say them all, but since we're all remote, right? Like, Heather's on Duwamish land, right? There might be a couple of folks that are in lots of different places, but we really do take the time to mention it all. And I found that just helps not only start the meeting in a great way, just positively, but also acknowledging and respecting the work and grounding us in why we're here. And I absolutely love that. And then kind of touching on that too, like it's not land acknowledgement related, but we specifically look out to diverse speakers and just also speakers that are more versed in the work that we do. I mean, like I'm a STEM coach, but I've only been in this role for about 4 months. I've been a consultant, but I'm only 27. I've only been doing this for about 2 years. So when we want an expert, we look out to diverse folks from all over. Diversity means a lot of different things. And then I've also been in a really cool situation a couple of times where if like a white person is speaking or asked to give a PD, they'll actually either defer it to me. So they'll be like, oh, Victoria, you should get her. Or I'm invited to co-present so we can both share our resources and our knowledge. And I just love that, because again, like that's, good for all students right there, right? Like you might be looking at a presentation and figuring out, we are learning about GMOs, but I don't really know anything about that. Let's go on Skype in the classroom and see if we can get an expert to come in. Or, I'm talking about, Microsoft Word, but I'm not too great at some of the math functions. Why don't we get like another teacher to come in and talk about it? Leveraging all of our strengths is another part of that positive intent. And if I know that I'm not wonderful at something, then I'm not going to do it. But that's just kind of the person I am. So I'd much rather defer and ask for a person that's an expert to share their expertise. That way students and teachers hear more than just me, than have to kind of scramble last minute to figure out if I can put something together.
Right, totally. And Dr. Desiree asked this question, and I this is not a question that I can answer, but how is land acknowledgement different than where are you from?
So with land acknowledgement specifically, it's about understanding the history that has brought you to be here on this land, and then seeking to kind of understand where you fit in or your place within that history. So when I think, where are you from? Like there are a lot of different things I can say. Technically, I'm from Tacoma or Seattle area, but I'm from New Jersey. And that's actually what I say when folks are like, where are you from? Like, I'm Jersey girl, born and bred, but I lived in South Carolina for about 8 years. So when I say, where am I from? I kind of have a couple different answers. But when I think about land acknowledgement, it doesn't exist in past, present, or historical. It's like an ongoing process. So that's like, where are we right now? Whose land are we on? And it decenters you as the educator and recenters it on the Native and Indigenous folks that came here before we were even here. So when I think about just land acknowledgement as a whole, like this is about the Indigenous people to whom the land belongs, first and foremost. It's a history of the land and any related treaties, conflicts, anything that went on. It's correct pronunciation of tribes and places and individuals. And then it's also acknowledging that we are respecting this land that they're on and doing this work today to advance that forward. That was kind of long, and I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
We're kind of passionate about that acknowledgement.
Listen, if you can replay this, so you can replay that again. If you one thing that you said, and I think that sometimes we take language for granted, but you said decenter yourself. And if you're just a new person in this journey of learning how to be anti-racist or learning how to embrace that there are other perspectives besides your own, especially if you are coming from a very privileged background, hey, that's me. Listen, I'm in that journey with you. So I want to be comfortable. It took me a couple of years to understand what the heck that meant, to decenter yourself. And so this is something that we didn't plan on talking about, but that's language that we use in this. And so can one of you talk about, what do you mean when you say decenter yourself?
For me, decentering is making sure that I don't think I am the center of the world, basically. That my point of view, how I've grown up, the things that I've learned, my personal perspective on life is the only perspective. And I sometimes think that's what causes a lot of problems in the world, is that we dig our heels in and, we say this is the way it is without trying to look at other perspectives. It's all about the empathy. It's all about the compassion. It's all about perspective taking. So it's not always about me. It's about me within this space, me with others, me on this land. Who am I? Where am I? Is defined not just by how I define myself. And so when we decenter, we open ourselves up, we open our hearts up, we open our minds up, we open our feelings up to other people and other perspectives. So for me, that's what the decentering and centering means.
Mm-hmm. To me, I would say decentering means holding space, right? So if I were to think of the definition of holding space, it's not jumping into problem-solving mode, thinking about other folks, and also just like legitimately having empathy and listening to them and hearing them, right? Not steamrolling, not gaslighting, making sure that people are heard. That is super important to me. And I get really disappointed and upset when I'm asked a question or maybe something happens and then my input is considered, but not really. It just kind of turns into a steamrolling session. Decentering means that the person is being honored and listened to and valued, and you think before you react. It's not jumping into problem-solving mode or accusatory mode. It's you are thinking before you respond to me. And then centering, of course, would be the opposite in that space, right? Not holding space, not giving time to listen. When I think of folks who center and like activities where people are centered, it is kind of a hot mess because nobody gets the chance to speak up and no one gets the chance to hear or listen. So again, if we were to kind of revert back to land acknowledgement, if I were to think about that, I'm not thinking about myself as a Black American woman in this meeting that I may or may not want to be in the first place. I'm thinking about the land that I'm on and what I can do to acknowledge those folks and acknowledge this land.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to say that it's just like when you're trying to decenter yourself, it is so incredibly hard unless you go through a lot of reflection and what you're doing and putting out in the world. When you understand that we're not the sun, I think that's where privilege comes from. When we think that like everything revolves around our perspective and our thought processes, like it's like we're the sun and everything revolves around that. And I really feel like that's where privilege is born. It's stepping outside of that when others have always had to step outside of that because they were never in the center with you. And so realizing that after a lot of reflection, like it actually pushes you to be better and do better. And we talk about how can we find resources that are good for all students. That won't even happen until we jump out of that center and realize all the things that we've done anyway that are probably very damaging in the first place. And then we get out of that, we have to decenter ourselves. I'm so glad you said that. We did not prepare to talk about that, but I really think when you're removing yourself from privilege and you're removing yourself as the sun and everything revolving around it, that's when you can start looking at how to vet. And we do have a comment. One of the things I've struggled with is doing this with people who violate basic human rights of others. I began to disengage.
I get disengaged too. It's not worth my time, not worth my bandwidth, not worth my energy. You know, if somebody else wants to take it up, and I think too, like, and I don't know if this is just specific to me as a woman of color, but it's not my job to rectify. You know, if something happens and maybe thank you. Ren's deciding he wants to be a part again now. But again, if something happens, and I'm just trying, and if they're not receptive, if they're literally violating basic human rights by their virtues or their words or whatever, then that's not my fault, you know, and also not my job to rectify. I can try as best I can. I think as educators, all we can do, unfortunately, sometimes is just give resources, give information, and then they do what they want with it. Some folks are more successful at that than others, but at the end of the day, we have to protect our empathy, right? Which I always talked about, protect our empathy, protect our energy. If it's not worth it, then it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I think the key point there, Victoria, is that you've tried. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it takes both sides to listen to each other and try to understand each other. When you have one person who's really not trying to understand or not really taking part in that courageous conversation with those 4 agreements, it's very difficult to have that conversation. So we attempt, we try, but at a certain point, we need to sort of step back and say, you know, I need to use my energies with others who do really want to have this courageous conversation and understand, even if they don't change their point of view. And, you know, I think that's the thing, is not cutting them off just because they violated somebody's human rights or somebody's space or whatever. But after having tried to speak with them, just stepping back and saying, you know, I don't think that, you know, we're going to get anywhere with this conversation. Right. So, yeah, it's not an easy thing. But I think if we're able to even affect change in some, it's a really important endeavor, and we do need to try to do that. And when we're talking about, you know, vetting resources, especially in terms of EdTech, we're so lucky because we're really able to dig deep into what it is the EdTech is being used for, how it's being used, and whether it's really sensitive to all of our students. And, you know, I take what Victoria was saying about decentering and centering. That's so important that teachers do that with students.
Yes.
You know, that our students are the ones that we really need to pay attention to, listen to, get to know, create that safe space for, so that they do feel they can talk about the things that are important to them, that bother them, that if they see something that maybe we haven't seen, because we're not perfect, we have our own perspectives, that they feel free to call it out and say, you know, I don't think this is right, or I have a question about this. we need to make sure that our students who are very savvy feel safe to be able to speak out.
For sure. We have a wonderful, it says, I think it's good to mention that in these conversations, because we speak from a viewpoint of being inclusive, but I know many educators who struggle when inclusive means dealing with viewpoints which do go against basic human rights, and even those who define those rights differently. And definitely, and I think that I'm not super smart, but like I think that that's exactly why we have to have courageous conversations in the first place. But I mean, if your definition of human rights is violating somebody else's, you can't expect them to stick around. They have to protect themselves. And if you're that person feeling violated, you must also walk away without feeling any guilt. Like, it's not your burden to make somebody else see you as a human being. Like, if they can't see your humanity, that's their burden. And you don't have to stick around and take any abuse for that. I will say that I do feel very strongly that as a white person, that it's my job to help other white people understand this. And I've gotten the door slammed in my face countless times. And I'm not saying this to like make myself better. I've lost deep relationships. My husband and I lost a couple that were our close friends that we had vacationed with our family. Like, they decided to leave us because I didn't like the current president and I didn't agree with his stuff. And I spoke about what I was learning, and that was just too much for them. And I lost a good friend a couple of months ago who I had opened myself up to here in Alaska. And she told me that I just didn't have any values because they weren't the same as her. And the thing is that there's always a cost, and everybody has a cost. My cost was I lost relationships. Other people have lost their lives, their livelihoods. Other people have had losses of their basic humanity being taken away from them. So this is not an easy venture that we're on, but it is very necessary, especially as we go globally, and especially as the world is starting to see that we have been wrong. Our history is full of just evilness. I don't know how else to say it, but our history is not wonderful, and we can still love our country. We can still love our neighbor and acknowledge that we've been wrong in the past. I've got to, yeah. So I don't mean to laugh. This is not like easy. My son is in here. He's a 2-year-old. He has no idea what we're talking about.
He's a cutie.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
And some folks, unfortunately, equate traditional customs and beliefs as being wrong, and to question or push back makes it uncomfortable. Very true. Yes. And right. But when this all collides in one classroom where there is no walking away, teachers need training and skills of how to deal with this, because it's happening every day in classrooms. Great conversation. Dr. Desiree, we need to have you on here. Seriously, she's right.
Yes.
This is happening all the time. And how often do students really feel safe to speak up, and when have they been silenced? We're talking about utopia. All of us here, we're talking about utopian beliefs at this point. Thank you for that. So we are actually, I want to respect everybody's time. We go over, but it was great. And we do have a Flipgrid, and I dropped it in the comments, and we would also love to keep hearing from you. This Flipgrid is in the comments. It's also on the QR that Dr. Eileen made and shared out on Twitter and Facebook. And so we hope to get this conversation to continue. And we're not actually going to meet next week. We're going to meet in a couple of weeks. We're going to take some time off, and our next, let me see if I can get to our next topic. All right. What does implementation look like, short-term versus long-term? So before we go off, ladies, I want to thank everybody from all of our communities that joined, and especially those who were brave enough to share their thoughts. But do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share before we go offline? And I'm going to mute myself.
I'm really excited for next week. I am really excited. We've kind of been sharing strategies here and there and whatnot, but next week is going to be implementation, more actionable strategies for you to take with you in your classroom, short-term implementation, and then long-term implementation. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and I really appreciate all of the discussion and all of the interaction that we had from people who are watching and listening. And of course, from Melody and Victoria, I appreciate both so much. it's really important that we have these conversations. And this conversation today was not as specific, perhaps, as the actual vetting. What do we do? How do we vet, and so forth? We'll be doing that next time, because we felt that it was important to have this general conversation about what does that look like, and how do we all feel about it, and what can we do about it, and then defining some of the terms. In education, there are so many buzzwords. It's really important that we have a glossary so that we all know what we're talking about. So, and thank you both so much, and thanks to everybody who joined us.
Yeah, I think that this has been our best conversation so far because of all of the voices that have chimed in. So I just want to thank you for joining in from Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. You guys are amazing, and y'all give me hope. And it's always an honor to be in the room and share space with both of you ladies. I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.